I've done since then.
You're very tall, John.
Oh my God, off the screen.
It's all right.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep this short. The full argument can be found in a paper published in the British Journal of History of Science. It concerns the history of AI, and it concerns a particular instance. And it's going back to what we heard from Vasily. And it's about one of the causes of the so-called AI winter, the first real crash in funding in the early 1970s, which had many causes, many factors, and it may not even exist, right? But one of the causes is often attributed to the mathematician James Lighthill, who wrote a report for the British Science Research Council on artificial intelligence and the state of research and whether or not it should be funded. And basically, his critical comments set off a wave of cuts in funding in AI research around the world, really. And I've always been interested in this moment, partly because I've always, interested in Lighthill. I knew he had a background in fluid mechanics, which is an area of mathematics that I was interested in. And it's a little archive story. I've wondered for ages about where are Lighthill's archives. It's such an important moment in the history of computing. Lighthill is such an interesting figure. Those archives must be somewhere, right? And I was searching for them, and I hated to do another research a few years later. For some reason, I could never find them. I'm based at UCL. I finally did another search. It turned out that they were 100 meters away from UCL archives, because he was provost. He was provost of UCL at one stage. So there he is, James Lighthill. Ever so slightly like Ronnie Barker. Okay, it's very short. Basically, in the paper, and contact me if you can't find it, it tells a story of going into the archives and uncovering, I think, some of the motivations behind what Lighthill was doing. It's usually taken to be an attack on artificial intelligence, right? And I found, I think, I'll give you two sort of findings. One is to do with where this came from. I won't say much more about Lighthill himself. He's very Ronnie Barkerish there. In fluid mechanics, aeroacoustic mathematics, how birds fly, how blood flows, all kinds of things. But the Lighthill report comes from an invitation from Brian Flowers, who was chair of the Science Research Council in the early 1970s. Yeah, Brian Flowers, who you'll know from other things to do with computing in Britain as well. Anyway, this letter is remarkable. It provides an incredible steer to Lighthill. He says, these subjects and artificial intelligence itself are highly complex, very much the preserve of experts and perhaps sometimes plausible charlatans. It's an invitation to do this report, to look into this, but with a message, right? Go in and be a bit critical. Lighthill is not someone who gets told what to do, though. Lighthill is very much his own man. And he goes around, he interviews people around the country, he spends a year or so talking to people, goes to Edinburgh, he goes to Sussex, he goes around the country, basically getting a sense of where the field is. Not talking enough, not long enough, when according to his critics, when the report comes out, but that is how he builds up this research, this report into this area. And when it comes out in a really curious way, eventually published, alongside responses from people that he's actually criticising in the report. Now, to cut a long story short, Lighthill's argument is that you can see artificial intelligence in the 1970s as being essentially three areas, or spectrum at least. At one end, you have things to do with, it calls advanced automation, but this is like replacing people with machines, right? You can think of it as clerical automation, or you can think about it as other kinds of factory-like automation, for doing specific tasks. At the other end, what you call computer-based central nervous system research, closely connected with brains, psychology, neural net type things, right? And he said in the middle there's this bridging category, B for bridge, B also weirdly building robots, right? And this is where you found a lot of that much more general AI work going on. And he basically says that A and C are coherent and advancing fast, great, but B is over-promising, and it has failed again and again, and basically the funding should be cut, severing AI as a coherent thing. He didn't think AI was a coherent program. And that's where the sort of, that conclusion is that AI funding should be cut. It's on the heart as well. But, and this is my argument, when you look at Lighthill's career, when you look at the specific reasons why he attacks this middle section in particular, it boils down that what he's most concerned with is not really artificial intelligence. It was about what good science and good applied mathematics should be. And he, throughout his career, quite a few examples of this, is that Lighthill was absolutely convinced that the best science, the best applied mathematics, came from a really close connection with applications and the problems of the world. If he wasn't closely connected with problems being genuinely encountered in the world of work, then it wasn't going to lead to good applied mathematics or even good science more generally. He thought A and C certainly did, and B didn't. Right? So building general robots that could do all kinds of tasks is just not close enough to specific applications, he thought, to be something that's going to generate good science. So I'm going to finish there. It's an argument that what we think that Lighthill was complaining about, artificial intelligence, for a Lighthill, it's actually trying to enforce principles of where he thought good, productive science came from. So we slightly get him wrong, I think. I'll stop there so we have some time.
Thank you, John. Yeah, we're fairly limited on time for questions, but Chris, can you come back up? Chris, take us through. Okay, so fascinating insert. So it's the questions. Yeah.
Question of Vasilios. You didn't really refer to the language of security and how that changes over time. You perhaps didn't refer to some of the areas that are now being described as the metaverse. How would those two subjects fit in your frameworks?
So thank you very much for this question. So the metaverse feeds into the aspect about human-computer interaction and virtual reality, and also something I spoke earlier about blockchain and the sort of digital object identification. Security I haven't really looked at, to be honest, but I think it's an important factor that shapes these linguistic choices. Obviously, the term itself is used in order to express different things. So customer security, national security, there's a vast space between them. And one just sometimes justifies the other. So we've got technological spillovers from one to the other. Kind of speaking to John's talk, this applied kind of idea that technology has to be applied if it's science feeds into that, security is used as an applicable source. And partly in response, I think Lighthill comes straight after 1969 Manfield's Amendment in the United States, sort of post-Vietnam War, where likewise in the States, all technology, all DARPA funding had to be applied in terms of security. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Oh yes, sorry.
Yes, can I raise the black box problem? Chris, you alluded to the fact that it's sometimes very hard to know what's going on in conventional programs. I think John went even further and alluded to the existence of charlatans. One personal difficulty I had when using neural networks in a commercial context about 10 or 15 years ago is that we didn't have a clue what was going on. And isn't there this deep concern that because AI is somehow remote, somehow black box, somehow you can't decompose it into its mathematical equations, somehow it's almost assuming a life of its own, which you can't interpret? How do people feel about AI as a black box?
Well, basically, as far as I was concerned, when I was, if you like, working as a manual chatbot, there were black box areas always. I was responsible for a time with correspondence with South Africa, with Australia and such like. I had no first-hand experience of farming in any of those areas. And I think this is an important thing. Because quite often, when black box say, what's inside, there's always going to be something you don't know. Where whatever the topic is. The important thing I think with humans and the way they handle it is that they can handle things they know, and they are prepared for things that they don't know. And we don't use, and I think it's one of the problems with the connectionist approach. Because the system I've got, you can look at it in that way, but I'm quite sure that the human brain does not use advanced mathematical statistics to work out the connections. And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of these things are black boxes, because they use mathematical techniques, which are maybe very, very valuable for some tasks. Don't get me wrong. Some of the modern AI big data stuff is very, very powerful. I'm using one of the chat boxes at the moment in terms of the research I'm doing. I put up maybe a slightly unconventional idea, and it comes back, and it makes various comments, and I may not agree with it, but what it does tell me is what sort of opposition I will get to my idea. And that is very important if you're trying to be creative. I don't know if that...
Is one last question?
Yeah, a comment to John about the Lighthill report. Familiar, I had a look at that myself. I think that one of the analysis at the time was that his views were shaped by the extreme political differences among the various protagonists in AI. The question I wanted to ask, though, was the building robots is somewhat ironic, given that robots today are probably one of the major developments in industrial automation.
Yeah.
And have transformed the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it doesn't even make a lot of sense calling it building robots in the context of how then Lighthill then just goes on to describe that category, which is actually quite a mixed bag of quite a few areas of research and activity. So it may be that I think of the one of the main targets was Edinburgh and Mickey, and it certainly felt that way if you were in Edinburgh, for sure. And that's where some of the main robot work was going on. So,
and you use very colourful language too. I remember pseudo-maternal drive.
Oh yes. There's a Lighthill speculates on what might be driving this interest in general intelligence, and one of them is about supposedly men being jealous of the creative possibility of giving birth, and that's why Lighthill does reproduce that argument. And actually, James, I'm delighted you're here because your work was really important, and in that paper, you also, I think, say that perhaps Lighthill was motivated by either that sort of humanistic dislike or skepticism or concern or anxiety about artificial life and artificial intelligence. And it's interesting, I think maybe that could be part of a broader cultural response, but I don't think it quite works for Lighthill himself. I think you can really pin down throughout his career, from when he was director at Farnborough, for example, through to when he sets up the Institute for Mathematics and its Applications, and throughout, again and again, good science, good mathematics comes down to close attention to applications and problems.
Okay, I think we better leave it.
Can I just comment briefly? Because I was affected the sense by Lighthill. I actually attended his Royal Institution lecture.
Oh, yes.
And I found that I got more opposition after Lighthill on the basis that there was antagonism in some areas of artificial intelligence to people who dabble with commercial things. And I was actually told, that, doing something like handling 1 million invoices had nothing to do with intelligence.
That's probably true. Anyway, we better leave it there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. Thank you.